Rufus. So, when last we spoke, or I guess I talked to you because that's how, YouTube videos work, we were discussing the idea of worldviews, right? That when you encounter a piece of text, there are certain ideas in the text that are hegemonic, right? That the way that we understand the world is influenced by the ideas that have prevalence in the world, and that those ideas are sold to us in lots and lots of ways, right? We also talked about the idea that oftentimes those worldviews are sort of unnamed. With the David Foster Wallace example about the fish, right? Talking about the two young fish who are swimming along, and the older fish asks them how the water is, and the two younger fish kind of don't even know what he's talking about, right? They don't recognize that the material that they're swimming in is water. The ideas in the world are the water that we swim in, right? They are the things that inform, in this case, writing. They're the things that the writer has that maybe they don't even consciously recognize, or they're not consciously kind of thinking about as they're writing, but they're still things that are informing their writing, right? And so one of the processes of being an analytical reader, of being an informed reader, of being a thinking reader, is starting to name those ideas that are at work in a text and starting to explain the effects that they're maybe having, right? And so this is where things kind of get challenging, especially like when I talk about this with my students, right? And my kids are lucky because they have access to this textbook. It's called Writing Analytically. This is the 9th edition. I think that 9th edition is the newest one. Could be wrong. It's by David Rosenwasser and Jill Stephen. It's an excellent textbook. And there's a part of it that I really, really like to talk about when we start talking about making these sort of implicit worldview ideas explicit. And it's the idea Rosenwasser and Stephen introduce Rosenwasser and Stephen introduce the idea. Let's put it in that order, the normal order words go in. Rosenwasser and Stephen introduce the idea that everything means depending on context, right? And so what they're asking us to consider when they say everything means depending on context is that in a specific context, if you apply a specific context to a situation, then it is revealing of certain meanings, right? And so we talked about the curtains are blue idea in the last video, right? That the curtains are blue for a reason. The reason that the curtains are blue is uncovered by thinking about the context, right, of the curtains. So if we're looking at a scene in a book, right, and in this scene in the book, it comes right after a scene where the two main characters have been sort of fighting, and now they're making up, right, and the author is choosing to kind of describe the room where this reconciliation conversation is happening. And they describe the blue curtains, right? This context that this is a reconciliation conversation really matters, right? Because reconciliations should be calm. They should be, controlled. They should be something where both people are coming to the discussion ready to listen and to own up to kind of their part in whatever is needing to be reconciled. And so by adding in the blue curtains in this context of reconciliation, it helps us to see them as being part of the calming effect of the room as a whole, right? If we have this context of reconciliation, then we have a specific meaning for the blue curtains, right? Or if we are, reading a beach read, right? Or something kind of chill and cool and meant to be, lighthearted and read on the beach, and it's describing a beach house, right? The people in the book are also at the beach and they're enjoying their vacation. And it talks about the light blue curtains, blowing in the breeze, the sea breezes from the open window. Again, like the context matters there, right? The idea that this is a book that's meant to have this kind of calming effect or this kind of peaceful effect. The blue becomes important, right? Because we've applied this context to it. Whereas if we looked at something where we're reading a novel that's maybe a little bit heavier. It's about somebody sort of dealing with depression, and it's describing the bedroom that they've been laying in for days and days and days and days and days, right? And the author is talking about the heavy, dark blue curtains that are hung up in there. We're getting this kind of sadness, right? Because blue can also mean sadness. And the reason that we read them as sad in that place is because this context of the depression of the character that we're reading about, right? And so everything means depending on context is really important, right? And the context of the story that you're reading is part of the context, but there are other contexts. There are other contexts that we can look at, that we can identify and then bring to a piece of text. You do not have to only acquire your context from within the piece of text. You can also look outside for other kind of context to bring to a piece of text. And so when, again, writing analytically, excellent book, talks about this idea. They talk about this idea of the interpretive lens, right? So these are my reading glasses. I usually use them when I look at screens because I have a hard time looking at screens and reading what's on them. Obviously, I'm making this on a computer and I'm not wearing them while I'm making this on the computer, but that's not because I probably should be wearing them, but they have this weird reflection going on and I don't want to subject anybody to that. When I have them off, it's way harder for me to read what's on my screen, right? This makes it easier for me to actually see what's going on in the whatever I'm reading over here on my computer, right? I bring them from somewhere else and I put them in front of my eyes. Oh, they're really broken. I didn't realize that. And I put them in front of my eyes, and then suddenly things look different, right? And so when Rosenwasser and Stephen are talking about these interpretive lenses, what they're talking about is bringing an idea from another piece of text and putting it against the work that you're studying. In this case, we're talking kind of specifically about novels. You can do it with other things, but I'm gonna choose to kind of focus on fiction right now, just to limit our scope. And you bring this idea, and it helps you to understand, what is happening in this piece of text, right? And so the real question becomes kind of, where do you get interpretive lenses from, right? Where do these things come from? How do you decide that you have an interpretive lens? And the annoying answer is kind of everywhere. Like, you could get an interpretive lens from anything. But luckily, because of the fact that there are very smart people in the world, people who are much smarter than me, there are fields, right? There are fields of what we call critical theory that exist in literature. And critical theory involves a set of, like, a specific kind of viewpoint of context, right? And there are lots and lots and lots of critical theories that exist. You can talk about like feminist critical theory, you can talk about post-colonial critical theory, you can talk about formalist critical theory, and all of these things mean, right? All of these names that I'm saying mean this is a particular viewpoint that you can take. There are lots of people saying lots of very smart things about this particular viewpoint. You can read these very smart people saying these very smart things about this particular viewpoint, and you can bring those ideas to your text. And you can say, hey, if I connect this viewpoint to this piece of text, something new becomes apparent, right? And so as you are trying to become more analytical, as you're trying to become more aware of the ideas at work in a piece of text, this is critical. Ha ha ha. This is really important. I mean, critical in the sense of like, it is of the utmost importance, right? I think that the language of criticism confuses people, though, I will say, people who aren't kind of in academics. My kids really struggle with it when we talk about writing analytically. They all want to write critically. Negative connotation, right? They want to say, this is what this author is doing wrong, which is a type of writing that exists for sure. But in this context, we're back. The context is informing what we mean by the word critical, right? If we're talking about critical theory, we're not talking about theories of things that are bad. We're talking about critical in the sense that we use it when we talk about like critical thinking, right? Or when we talk about the idea of like, when we talk about the idea of critical theory, we're saying that these are ideas that are of the utmost importance, right? These are ideas that are worth considering more deeply. And so this kind of interlude between the first video where I talk about why I'm making this and the video that's going to come after this one, where we actually like play with some critical theory, is important, kind of a sidebar. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a critical theory. We're going to pull some lenses from it, and we are going to use them to analyze Dungeon Crawler Carl. We're going to use it to talk about some of the things that we see happening in Dungeon Crawler Carl. So again, if you haven't read Dungeon Crawler Carl, I suggest that perhaps you read Dungeon Crawler Carl, so that when I start throwing interpretive contexts at you, you are ready to, you at least have this part down. That's it. Have a good rest of your day.